Thank you.
And I've put my mic on. Is that better today?
Getting old.
It's all right. I'm normally very shouty. People normally tell me to be more quiet, not more loud. So, right now. We'll get going. We've got the evacuation procedure to start. I don't think there's anyone here that hasn't heard it before, so we're not planning a drill this evening. So if there is a siren, please follow the evacuation procedure. On hearing the evacuate signal, please carry out the following and exit the building by your nearest and safest exit, which is probably behind you on there. All visitors report to assembly point G. All staff report to their designated assembly point on Woolpack Way. And please don't leave the assembly point for any reason until told to do so by the incident controller or the fire brigade officer. And I'm assuming that our incident controller tonight will be Paul. So we'll follow you. Thank you. I have no apologies for absence or members aware on official council business. I have Councillor Ray Jarvis with us this evening. As in addition, any disclosable or pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests this evening? Oh, lovely. Public participation. We are, as usual, overrun with questions. And then moving on to the minutes of the Resources Board held on the 26th of January 2026. Actually, a quick look through those. Any comments?
With the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. They've been moved and I'll second those. So thank you. I'll sign those. And we'll move straight on to agenda item 6, which is council tax collection. Our recommendation this evening is that we note the contents of the report. Do I have any comments on agenda item 6? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. The report does paint a reasonable picture, but I'm sort of left feeling I'm not entirely sure where we are in terms of debt collection. It seems to me to be saying it's better than the 80% issue. I can't remember exactly the numbers that I read, but it's 50 something. So what I would like to understand is a more detailed report on how we are recovering from arrears that arose during the COVID period. Because the report talks about it, but it doesn't enable me to absolutely understand it, and I don't understand the trajectory that will lead us to resolution. I'm very happy with what the report says about how we are responsibly dealing with these. That I'm perfectly happy with, and I think that was really the intent of the report, and I'm very content with that. I think we're doing the right thing at the right time in the right way. But I don't know how much we're owed.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Yeah, it's come up before, and we talked about looking at the debt profile as well, haven't we? And I'll bring Paul in a minute. We looked at the debt profile as well and the ageing of that debt profile and tackling it in a more proactive way. To be honest, that's what we've been talking about in relation to that. I think this for us is about the plan, about how we deal with debt. And I like you, quite pleased that we are dealing with that responsibly and talking about 50% of debts have ended up transferring to enforcement agents post liability compared to 81% over the entire period since 2023. So, that's an improvement. But so that's the stat you were looking for in the report. But I do think actually some profiling of where we are bad debt wise is useful, and perhaps we can bring that back.
But I think it is good to know that we were at 81% of debts, but I don't know what proportion of the whole that 81% relates to. And it's good to know 81's down to 50. That's all good news. But is it 20 quid or?
Yeah, I'll bring Paul in and hopefully that'll make it a little bit more knowledge. We wish.
So So you gave what my answer, which is that the report was designed to look at how we were dealing with people, not the how much we're collecting. How much we're collecting is now a KPI in a suite of KPIs, and that will be brought on a regular basis, both here and soon. So we'll bring the year-end data with all of the other KPIs, and then regularly quarterly that information will come to board. So absolutely right. These are other things we're kind of catching up on. It isn't just council tax collection. There'll be the R collection and all of the other KPIs that we have in the suite that we'll bring. So and they're all so but they are coming, and we'll consolidate them into a year-end report. I believe there is a report going to exec board which sets out that is coming. I think you're right. Things like the ones that relate to resources will be here as well.
Chairman, as somebody who's slightly numbers dyslexic, the response is entirely words rather than numbers. But as my question was about what's the number, I am impressed that the section 151 officer managed to avoid giving me a number.
Be a politician, really.
Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, perhaps just to understand the process, because I was reading in the report, it talks about when we go after the money, i.e. the arrears, it talks about £100 for a magistrate's cost for us to go through the process. Do we not just add that to their bill? Or so it does that? I couldn't quite read it because it talks about, it says, I misread it.
It doesn't get specifically added, but it's a separate charge to them.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Councillor Barnett.
I think one of my points kind of been answered, but I just wanted to refer back to the motion at the recent full council meeting, because there was a request in there to about some measurables that would be expected to be put before the resources board on an annual basis. So I just wanted to check that all of those are going to be included in those KPIs. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, I mean, that motion also posed about not immediately requiring payment of the full year when the first or second instalment is missed. Now, I have to say, since that motion was passed, I've gone and reviewed the legislation. I'm not entirely sure it's something we're able to do, but I would have expected something in this report to have taken that into account and at least justified why we couldn't do it.
And are you referring to point 2.6 in this pack?
Yes, yeah.
Where it says here, the remainder of, in the event of failure to pay the specified instalment, a reminder notice is served in relation with the regulation. The remainder advises the unpaid sum together with instalments becoming due within 7 days. The amount in question is required to be paid within 7 days from the date of issue of the reminder notice. Failure to pay within 7 days will result in a full balance for the period becoming due after a further 7 days. So is that the full balance of council tax, or is that the full balance of owed council tax? As not including the balance of the entire year's fee. Because that to me was a little bit vague in that.
I don't know. So my understanding is based on years, and will take the debt within a specific year, so it will relate to that to that debt. There may be other debts outstanding that have already been dealt with, but they would be debts related to the year in question. That's
Yeah, so if somebody had £100 to pay and they missed that instalment, they would be sent a reminder to bring their account up to date at that point, which is the £100 that they owed at that point. It's just a reminder at that stage to pay that £100. If they bring that up to date and they pay that £100 and then fail to make another instalment, they get a second reminder, again telling them to bring their instalments up to date. They've still got their instalment plan at this point. It's only if they fail to meet that instalment plan that then they will be issued the final notice, which removes the right to pay by instalments.
So that's the full year.
That's when the full year becomes due. That's what the legislation says. However,
Yes.
we do operate a more supportive process, and we've talked about that with the motion, that we would always look to get someone on a special arrangement at that point, and ensure that we adjusted the instalments that were more affordable to them, even if it took longer to then recover that money.
Yeah, I understand that, but well, certainly my reading of the motion was that council didn't want that to happen. I mean, I understand now that the legislation doesn't let us change that. I was just a bit surprised that there wasn't any justification as to why we hadn't changed that in the report.
I'm not,
Well, so the motion, or the bit that is it to commit to a policy of not immediately requiring payment of the full year's council on first or second missed instalment. If this policy needs to change for any reason, it is brought to the resources board for approval. So that seems contrary to that process to me.
So were you expecting to see a note in the report that said actually they might take a more discretionary approach?
Well, I think originally I would have expected it to have been changed to that, but I've since gone and checked the legislation and realised we can't change it. I think I would have just expected, rather than it appear, from reading the report, it appears that the motion was ignored. I would have expected to say we have this motion, but the legislation doesn't allow us to make that change.
no, so through you, Chair, so the way that we read the motion was that was what we were already doing. So, and that was what we discussed with Councillor Stewart, and what was,
Okay.
and that was
discussed with them. They were happy.
that was accepted, and that was why the motion went through the way that it did. So it definitely wasn't considered to be contrary to what to what we were doing.
Okay.
So
Maybe it was just my reading of it.
yeah, and to be honest, now you've read it out. It is vague, isn't it? Because
Well, we can't do what I thought it was doing. Anyway, so.
no, quite. And so the legislation drives what we need to do. I think the key point in the end was that if we were going to do anything different to what we were already doing, we would bring it back here. So that was the sentiment or the thrust of the motion, was that the members were happy with the approach that we were taking. I think Kate's right. We always try, and I mean, I have a relatively small number of second complaints that come to me, which is, in my experience, quite unusual and obviously reasonably positive. The ones that I have, we've always displayed that we've tried to resolve a matter with somebody going through it. And what I feel is, and it is a feeling rather than knowing, because I don't know every individual council tax payment, is that we try and engage with people who engage with us, and we chase people who don't engage with us. And that's the distinction. So anybody who comes and wants to talk to us, we will try and help. And people who don't, we're chasing, and that's when we need the liability order, because we need to secure the debt and we need to be able to chase the debt in full. And I think is that fair?
Yeah.
Kate, I don't know if you want to either add or subtract.
No, I think that's
Anything that's said.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Look, Councillor Parsons, then Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd absolutely agree on the two occasions that I've been approached. What Katie said has been absolutely true. The officers, when I've got in touch with them, have done everything they can to actually help the people who are struggling with it. One of the things that did come to my attention was the question of new estates, where the houses haven't actually been given a council tax, have they? There's two young ladies who were bought their first homes separately, as it were, and they'd had letters that were a bit bad. First of all, they were told that their house hadn't been badly, therefore, that's there. But they could make payments if they wish, that we have over in lieu of this. So they were, they had no idea of knowing what their council tax was, and indeed there was a thing about, and they weren't quite sure how to be credited. Well, that put them off completely, obviously. They were then received a sort of letter at the start of December to say they wanted you wanted the whole lot by the end of December, which sort of took the edge off their Christmas a bit. Anyway, they called me, I got in touch, and everything was, they were giving three instalments to sort it out, and they were fully happy with that and did it. They weren't trying to avoid any payment or anything like that. They just, that was there. I just wonder if we could change the model of advice given. I think what disturbed them was the fact that, for a start, they didn't know how much they were going to pay, and that there's no way around that until it's paid. But they weren't given any assurances about how their payments would be credited, and I think we could do something about that, basically.
I'll give a very quick personal perspective because I've been in exactly that situation, and the reason why I think it is, and Katie will give you the proper answer. So the valuation office have a backlog of up to 7 weeks, and they only start to process these things when they're made aware of them, which I believe is on the developer, not on us. We were given, so when we in a different place at a different time, we're given exactly that same information. You can pay, even though you don't know what your band is. You can make an informed guess at what you think your band might be and pay an amount related to that band. And it does, and so we did, because we didn't want to be in that position. Now, I can understand, I work for local authorities, so I know the money's not going anywhere. So I was reasonably confident that would be the case. I can understand why the people might not be, but that's from a personal perspective. Kate will give you the professional answer.
Yeah, so there are some significant delays with the valuation office agency at the moment, over 12 months for some properties. We've had properties come in February, banking us back to last April. So we were concerned September time for some of these properties, knowing that they had minimal instalments now to collect the whole of the 2025 bill. We're even more concerned now for those customers who are going to be receiving a 2025 bill to be paid in full. We've sent them a couple of banding letters. The one that you're referring to is in December, the pre-banding letters. So we're regularly going back to these customers and reminding them that this is an option for you. We do give them a breakdown of how bandings are calculated so they can look at how much they paid for their property, which would give them a bit of an estimate of what the banding's likely to be. If they're paid council tax in the borough previously, they'll retain the same account number, so we'll be told they can continue paying on that account number and it will just credit. We've also had some lengthy discussions this week about what we're going to offer some of these customers who get a bill with one instalment, and now they've got the 2026 bill as well. So what we're saying is, realistically, we want to collect it as quickly as possible, but if it's going to take us to March 27 and then we offer them 12 instalments to pay 2025 and 2026, then that's what we'll have to do. So it's a difficult position to be in for those residents, and we are doing what we can. We could probably do more with some comms out there. I'm happy to do that and get some more information on the website.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as I say, in the two instances the two ladies were dealt with very, very sympathetically and very well. No complaint at all. It's just you sometimes worry that the people who haven't got in touch with somebody, it can be a disaster waiting to happen, basically. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Osborne and Councillor Humphreys.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The motion, as Paul suggested, brought forward by us as a group. When we actually looked into it and spoke to Paul and the team, most of which North Warwickshire Borough Council are already doing very good standard. So that motion was just about ratifying that, really, that becomes the standard, and anything that can be added to that legally, I would highly recommend as well. To go back to Mark's point there, I think it's a good one, that it's great to deal with the percentages, but unless you know what a percentage of it is, it loses some of the impetus, really, especially for the people in the board. But what I would say is another part that, since I've been looking into this, the North Warwickshire Borough Council does extremely well is that we only go after people after we've exhausted every single other avenue and process. And we realise that putting debt collectors and other costs onto people who can be dealt with by other means, jumping the gun, as it were, it's not the approach that we want to do. So anything that does go down that road is quite well documented. It's a last resort. So I'm quite proud of that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, comes a point at which you're adding to a bill that isn't being collected, but as Paul has commented on, you want people to engage.
Yeah.
And actually it's those that don't engage that often end up in that situation because they're not working with the opportunities available to them, which are plenty up until that point. Councillor Humphreys.
I've got a moment if I can ask the chairman of planning, how many houses did we actually complete last year? And I can go back to the end of COVID. That year we completed 86, and my feeling is we can't actually assess. I don't know how many houses you're going to tell me now. 300 houses last year, was it? To assess that many houses, and then if you go onto an estate and 20 of the houses are all the same, the assessments must be very easy to actually do.
I
And I
think
can't
that's
believe that
probably
we're gonna
something we need to take up with the valuation office because
Well,
we
I
don't do the assessment ourselves.
I find it bonkers that you can't actually assess an estate that's all the same, and it's going to take till 2027.
I absolutely agree with you, but obviously there's one valuation office in the country, isn't there? And they value it, they do the valuation for everyone. So it isn't actually an NWBC failure that's a valuation officer that we would need to engage on that. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to do my level best to emulate Mr. Smith and provide an answer without actually putting a number on it. Oh, I'm certain he didn't know them, but I don't. But what I do think is important is that over the life of the plan to be, we'll be looking at 700 houses a year. So if we're having a difficulty then in getting the valuations through, it's going to be a much bigger problem in the future. And I absolutely accept what you're saying. It's a valuation office, but I guess we sort of know roughly what the bands are going to be broadly. They may not be exact, but most of them we can probably have a fair guess at. And I think that's what the officer was saying by saying, well, you know how much you paid for it, so you know roughly where it fits. And I think to give people that sort of guide that, you know,
But that's what they're doing.
can't be certain of it, but you probably a D or an F or whatever it is would be helpful.
And that's what they're doing. They're saying in pre-valuation, we think you're a band F. And if they pay band F and they're fortunate to be a band E, then we owe them money. You know, it's not a bad place to be. But people are choosing not to pay anything. And that's where they're becoming unstuck, I think. Because they are getting communication and they are getting an offer to sort of make payments throughout the year before the full valuation, aren't they?
Yeah, and just to add to that, we can't actually issue a legal bill until the property's been banded. So we could advise them on what to pay in the position that they'll be in if they don't, but they choose not to pay us.
There is an allied problem to that in terms of where we know people owe us money, but they haven't actually got an address. We know they're there, we know the property is there, and we can see it, but we can't send them a bill because they don't have an address. And that's a big issue for me as well.
Yeah, not having postcode. Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Davey and Councillor Parsons.
Thank you. Looking at it from a welfare benefit point of view, if they haven't been given a council tax bill, an official legal council tax bill, and they can only apply 3 months backdating for council tax support, what happens then when, you know, it takes 12 months or whatever for them to get an official legal bill? Are they going to be able to backdate their council tax support application for that length of time, or just as it stands, 3 months?
No, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we remove backdating from the policy. So there's no limit on backdating for council tax support. Usually in these scenarios, somebody would have submitted a claim for council tax support, and then it would receive pending while the property awaits banding, and then we'll process the claim at the same time that we receive the banding for council tax. So it'll all be done within the same couple of days that they'll get their council tax support award and their bill.
And the backdated, obviously.
Yeah, so in those cases, if someone submitted an application at the time they moved in, they would generally probably have been on council tax support at their previous address, so their claim will just sit pending, waiting for banding at the property. If someone moved into the area with a brand new property, so they've not claimed in our area before, and they hadn't submitted a forward, there's no restriction on backdating. In those scenarios, we would just go back and audit.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Councillor Parsons, you had the hand. Yeah.
I'll be very brief, Chair, thank you. I mean, yes, that sounds all important stuff. The only thing I would ask is that we could perhaps strengthen the point about the payments being credited. I accept that they're not being, the way of crediting them. It's a technical explanation. It's not a real explanation. But people who are new homeowners don't necessarily appreciate that nuance, and something needs to be said to them to make it clear that any payment will count and will be credited. That will happen.
Thank you. I think we've been around that one, so I'm happy to move that from the chair if there's no further comments. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Simpson. All in favour? That's everyone. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 7, we have the internal audit plan with a recommendation by our board tonight to consider and approve the plan for 26-27. We've got Martin with us in SEMA, so welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I'm just on my first bit, my first line of it, from presenting the audit plan for 26-27, wants to say that the council's internal audit services are provided by the Central Midlands Audit Partnership, so CMAP. This is the 26-27 audit plan and charter. I draw your attention to page 18, that's where it identifies purpose, the report and the role of internal audit. At the bottom there is a chart from the Global Internal Audit Standards, which identifies the latest take on the 3 lines of defence, which obviously identifies the first line as systems, procedures, policies, operation control and so forth. Second line is your management review, monitoring, committees, key performance indicators. Internal audit is in the third line of defence, which is your independent assurance. Over the page, on page 19 of your papers, it identifies the legislation behind it, the Global Internal Audit Standards. 9.4, they require the Chief Audit Executive to create an internal audit plan that supports the achievement of the organisation's objectives. In this instance, the Chief Audit Executive is myself from CMAP. I act in that role. It then at the bottom of that page makes reference to the Internal Audit Charter, which also forms part of the plan. This is the same charter which I brought to this committee, I believe, back in September. The new global standards came into effect 1st of April last year, as far as local government are concerned. So we devised a new charter last year in line with the new standards and brought it to the committee back in September. But we are legally duty bound to bring a copy of the charter and our mandate to this committee on an annual basis for annual ratification. The Internal Audit Charter is a formal document. It defines internal audit's purpose, the main purpose being to set out the function of internal audit, demonstrate our commitment to adhering to the Global Internal Audit Standards, and it identifies our mandate, in effect our legal right to audit. It also identifies our identity within the organisation and our position within the reporting profiles. So page 21 sets out our approach to internal audit planning, of which the Task and Finish Group for Internal Audit, which has been set up by this committee. I've had 2 complete presentations on that where we've gone through and showed them the risk assessment behind it and explained the impact and likelihood assessments and how the plan's derived from that. Page 22 onwards identifies the different types of internal audit work which can be undertaken. I won't go through them all, but they're all laid out there. For example, governance, ethics reviews, procurement, contract audit and so forth. Which brings us to the plan, which is Appendix A on page 24. That gives you the indicative plan for 26-27, the audits which we intend to undertake. You'll note from that there's 2 audits which have been deferred from the 25-26 internal audit plan, namely the climate change audit and partnership working, We have retained partnership working, even though at the last committee, that was one which we were going to drop from the plan moving forward to 26, 27. Obviously, the committee were quite open. They wanted that area including, so that was re-included back in there. There's also 2 audits which are essentially from the 25-26 plan, which have got delayed starts. That's because we've been waiting to identify the scopes for these audits, and they are just about ready to go now. But one of them has been the business change and transformation, and the other one being the cyber security audit. So we're going to bring those forward and start them formally as 26, 27 audits, as opposed to starting with just a few weeks left in the 25-26 financial year. Which then takes us on to page 26 onwards, which is the full internal audit charter. I'm not going to go through this in detail. As I said, it's been presented previously. I'll just give a summary of what it includes. You've got the role of internal audit there. You've got our commitment to adhering to the global standards. On page 27, you've got the authority, the internal audit mandate, which identifies it's a Section 151 Act of the Local Government 1972, which and then ties that in with the Constitution of the Authority here and the Accounts and Regulations Act 2015. I suppose the only other thing just to mention is on page 29, it lays out our independence and objectivity. This is a big thing for internal audit to ensure that it's independent and objective and can provide objective assurance to management and to the committee. Now, North Warwickshire are in a very strong position there because they've got the internal audit service being delivered by an external partnership, namely CMAC. I do not report directly through to Paul or anybody at the council, so I've got complete independence there, and I'm very objective, obviously, when setting scopes for individual audits. That's all I want to bring to the committee's attention from the report per se. If anyone's got any questions, for each statement.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. In particle, I can't remember where it helpfully points out that our role here is to review and approve. And it's the first word that I have most difficulty. Because I can read what's in front of me, but I can't read are those other potential audit plan assignments which are not here. Having read them, I think it's quite clear that all of them are important, and they're all ones that I would wish to see audited on a regular basis, particularly the key financial controls, which we've had issues with at previous meetings, and those items relating to the local government reorganisation and cyber. So I'm starting on the basis that all of this looks good, but I'm not really sure how effectively our review can be, given that we've been given the answer, not the question. Having said that, it looks okay. The one area that does sort of strike me that I would like more of an audit on is the effectiveness of enforcement. And we do have something in the report on enforcement later on, but I am quite wary that I'm never really entirely comfortable with where we are in terms of enforcement. So I'd like to look at that. And whilst as I have no issue with any of the items that are on the audit plan assignment, I find it difficult to say yes when I don't know what else could have been there.
Okay, so the audit strategy is usually produced in a sort of a 3-year view, isn't it? What you're going to look at, what you're looking at next year, and it's done on a risk-based approach. So we obviously engage CMAP, and we really had a lot of internal audit or effective internal audit. And they worked with us for a year to get us into a place so we can then put together a proper plan. And this is this year's plan. That's not to say that if something emerging came about, you couldn't substitute something. If some real emerging risk came, for example, if we were going to be particularly affected by the, what's going on at the moment in Middle East, so for example, that might bring about a change to the plan. But fundamentally, this is about allocation of their resource and what they're looking to do, so we can, work on all the scopes for all of those audits, so we can then look at that in order of as it's been put together. That's not to say we can't suggest other things that should be part of that audit plan, but it's done on a risk-based approach. So if you're concerned about risk around enforcement, then we need to have a look at that and perhaps bring that up in the task and finish group, and then we can have a look. Because one of the things this came about through our last task and finish, didn't it? Where we went through. So that would be quite a good place to bring that up, and you are a member of that, so that might be an ideal time to explore that a little bit further. But this is the plan for the allocation of days for audit this year. That's not to say it's you know, but the following year that certain things will roll. There'll be follow-ups on audits that have already happened, and then there'll be, you know, future review on risk management, presumably, that would then take that into account. So this is the list for this year, for the 26-27 financial year, that we're going to work through based on a risk approach. So when you say I'm not sure what the other audits could have been, they would be the other elements of that risk register that, you know, so for example, there'll be things on there that, you know, we are made that are scoring lower. So the likelihood or our proximity to that level of risk or our management of that level of risk is greater. At the moment, we've got an awful lot of work happening on the Leisure Centre project and a lot of management time and money invested. So that's clearly quite high up the priority list. So I think, personally, I think this is a reasonable list. But if you think there should be things on there, then I think we can create an opportunity to have a look at some of those things and filter them into the plan. Paul, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just so we did walk through with the working party last week on those other audits and the risk levels. That meant that these were the ones with the risk levels that were higher than those other audits that didn't make it on the list. That was the intent of going through with the working party in, you know, in a bit more detail, and that hasn't been provided here because this is what the result of that risk-based work has come up with. We can look at enforcement. I'm not even sure if it's on the list because I'm not quite in front of me, but we can take it away and have a look at it and share with you where we think the risk is. And if you think that we've got the risk level wrong, then we can have a look at it. And, you know, there's nothing to say that we can't move the plan within year, but we probably have to take something off to put something on, because obviously we built the plan to capacity, obviously with some contingency days to support things going over and taking longer. But we can definitely have a look at that.
Very happy with all that, Chairman. Having read all 17 pages of the report, it didn't tell me that.
No.
Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I do take on board Councillor Simpson's point, because you don't know what you don't know type thing. But I do take comfort from the fact that CMAP are an external organisation looking in. So it's not ourselves, not an internal audit. It's not us looking at marking our own homework as such. But I do think there's a balance between what we see as the important things. But I think we need guidance from CMAP and a 151 officer about what also as an organisation are important things. So I think there is a balance, and I think for what we've seen of the list, I think it makes sense of those. Because I always come from an IT background, the fact that cyber and that is high and it's QA, it's you know, I always kind of worry when we don't look at our IT strategy and our IT strengths, because that breaks organisations. You know, we've seen it with Jaguar Land Rover, we've seen it with Co-op almost, we've seen some significant cyber attacks. And I'm not convinced at the moment from an IT perspective we're as robust or bended as we could be.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on that? Well, if that's the case, then I'm happy to move that from the chair. 5 seconds. Thank you, Councillor Gilmore. Moving on to agenda item 8, which is our risk management report. So we've got Matt with us tonight from RSH. Our recommendation tonight is that the Animal Control's effectiveness assessment is noted, and the update to the strategic register, risk register, is also noted, which is the part of the report essentially we'll have used to understand our risk profile and where we need to then put our resource for that audit planning aspect.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, very convenient that I followed what Martin was saying about internal audit. I've just had a thought actually about your task and finish group, if I might just make a suggestion also. You could actually do some form of deep dive into an area of risk that's not covered by the strategic risk register, or maybe not a priority of internal audit. That's not uncommon with other authorities I work with. So that would be where you might bring an officer in and just explore a bit further the control environment, which might seem appropriate in those lesser risk areas. Right, back to the paper that you're looking at tonight. So we did a piece of work in this sort of final quarter of this financial year to take a look at the strategic risk controls. That was the main purpose of this piece of work. And the whole objective was to understand whether the control environment, through a management self-assessment, was as effective as they thought it should be. So we judge effectiveness of a control as being, does the control actually exist? Is the control, should I say, consistently applied? And does actually the control do what it's meant to do? Which is quite a weird thing to say, but a lot of businesses set up controls that don't actually manage anything, but they look like controls. So we tried to sort of tease that out. It is a self-assessment. RSM provided a form of overlay and check and challenge. We did not do any audit work. It's very much a piece of work about breadth, whereas internal audit do the depth. So if you think about the strategic risk register, you've got 14 key risks in there at this point in time. We've tried to take a view, or management have tried to take a view on all of the controls that manage those risks. With then internal audit supplementing that, as you've seen throughout the year, through the reports that you've got coming to this committee, doing the deeper dives into those areas. So the whole idea is that it provides a greater level of confidence. I'm not necessarily going to say in this instance assurance, but confidence the control environment is as effective as it could or should be. So that's what you've got in this report. Largely the conclusion, I'm going to come to a little bit of a sort of a caveat in a second, but largely the conclusion was that the control environment was generally effective. Okay, either the controls were deemed effective or partially effective, and there was one that was identified as not effective. My caveat is, right, based on my working with the council and the discussions we've had in this committee, and the fact that risk management processes are still maturing, bearing in mind, we haven't been a year into this process yet. And this is quite a change for the council. What I would say is I thought there was a little bit, the self-assessment was slightly more optimistic than I thought it might be of the control environment, but that will become better the more, I was talking to your Section 151 officer before, that will become more robust as we engage more with managers. We put an anecdotal feedback reference in the report, and I think this is one line is quite a significant change, because it talks about the fact that actually management are now getting, they are getting something from actually looking at strategic risks, thinking about the questions they're asking. Now, that to me is a positive step forward. Might seem small one entry line, but it actually is quite a big move, to be honest. So, yeah, it is what it is. It does add value to your assessment of the control environment. It will strengthen, I think, as we go on, the management of risk. And I do get a sense that actually risk is being talked about more amongst management. And I think eventually in this next few months or so, or year, I think the CMAP input and our input will join up more thoroughly, as it does in other councils where we work on similar projects. So I'm happy to not take any questions that you might have, really, to be honest, in connection, unless Paul's going to add anything. So.
Yeah, I tried to brief. Yeah, I think that's right. Optimistic, I think, is a good word. What I think will strengthen this is we've now established through the restructure extended management team, responsibility is now clear where this sits, and I think as an extended management team, we will see this and sit and see this together rather than it being done individually. And I think we'll all have input into other areas, because I read through some of these and think, yeah, I think the word partially might be reflective. So I think maturing, embedding, I think are all good words. I think compared to where we were, the horror of when I first started, which is nearly 12 months ago, that only feels like yesterday, of seeing a risk management audit with zero assurance. I think where we are now is night and day. So we are still, either on the start line or just off it, and we've still got a long way to go. But we have moved a significant distance in that time, and a lot of that is down to, again, You know, Martin talked a lot about the independence, but RSM do the same. They bring us an independent view, that check and challenge, which I think is really, really helpful. So helpful to the board to know, and certainly helpful from my perspective as a 151.
Thank you. I've got Michael Osborne, Councillor Osborne and Councillor Watts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My observation of the risk management that we've undertaken over the last 12 months is that you can actually see a thread of it in the budget that we've just recently passed, which is a good thing that the risk management plan has helped to sort of influence it slightly. I think that's only going to get stronger as the time goes on. So it does again confirm that we're on the right path, and I think the audit is again backing that up with the intelligence. One of my concerns is the health and safety element. I think with that, as we try to catch up with that risk, that some of the costs might be a bit unknown. I think we've tried to identify them as best we can. And as Paul pointed out, I think the senior management team have got a handle on that health and safety element now, and they're trying to get the responsibilities put in the right place so we can manage those costs and risks through. So I'm quite happy with the way that we've identified it as Borough Council, that the risks are being managed. They're being managed in an independent way, so the public can be assured that we're not just marking our own over.
Absolutely. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, overall, I think it's a positive report. I like green and a rag report, you know, and it shows a lot of the, measures are effective or partially effective, etc. It's really positive. But I think it's really important, picking up one of Matt's points, I agree with you on that line, because one of our concerns previously was that as an authority, there were people in our organisation who didn't get it, didn't understand the benefits of going through this process and understanding the risks, weren't answering the questions, weren't coming back quickly enough. So I think what we're reading, and I think where we are, is in a much better place than where we started this process.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Joe. I agree with all the previous two councillors have said. You know, I think this is a tremendous success for the authority, and I'm very grateful to our consultants for the work they've done. This puts us in a significantly better place. I like the idea about the deep dives too. I think that could be really helpful. If I have a criticism, it's of members as opposed to the people doing work, because I'm not sure yet that we really own the strategic risks and understand them effectively enough. But look, this is very good. I think there is a question in my head that a lot of these risks are very much about the corporate body as opposed to the wider community. So, for example, I don't really see where the risk of failing to deliver a new borough plan fits in here, and that there will be a significant impact on individuals. And indeed, the requirement for us to build so many more houses than what we had to do in the past. But look, that's a comment rather than criticism. This is very, very welcome. And I'm sorry, I didn't say that about the internal audit plan too, because that is almost an unmitigated success. And the fact that I don't have a clear feel for the entire population of what could be audited doesn't really mean that I was trying to criticise what's there. I'm quite happy with what's there. And just, from a governance point of view, I think we should collectively have a better view of it. I think that on this report, I generally have got a better view. I'm much happier that I understand the strategic threats to the authority.
Thank you. I think that's a really good reflection, and I wrote down about the deep dive, because I think that's a really good tool to use, perhaps through the task finish maybe, or widen that participation should we wish to actually get into some of the issues that may not ever see light as an internal audit subject, but actually have value because obviously the wider public element rather than the corporate. And I like that. The comment you made about the risk for not delivering a borough plan within a time frame as well, because that is significant risk to the residents of the borough. And that needs to be reflected as well. It's not just about what we do, it's also about what we don't do and the impact on others about that. So I think that has a time bound thing. I think that's important.
Risk would look different.
Absolutely. But you're in charge, Martin. Everyone has absolute 100% confidence.
That's why it's not.
Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on what Councillor Simpson was saying about probably not owning it as members of the resources board. We did say we would run, let's call it a sort of, I'm going to say a development session, and I'm not saying you all need developing, but what it really means is it gives us all an opportunity to chew through the things, not in a formal setting, to understand how the risk management process works on the ground a little bit more, particularly more strategically, and also to gather your thoughts around some of the areas of risk that you feel are appropriate. As I said to a local authority recently, it doesn't mean we'll take any notice of you, but what it does do, it gives you an opportunity to participate and for us to gather that wider set of thoughts or perceptions or real risks that we may not be sighted on. So, we will be doing that in the new financial year before the next resources board, I believe, which is probably later in the year anyway, isn't it? So, yeah. So just so you understand that. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be very welcome, I think. And we can widen that participation out from beyond resources board, because we're not the only people that are interested in that, actually. I know people might think that we are the only people that are like into that side of things, but actually there's a broader need to understand risk in your authority. Cool.
Yeah, firstly, thank you. I really appreciate the comments. To Councillor Ockley said this earlier, but to do linkages through to the budget is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking to knit all of this stuff together so that it's cogent and coherent. So that's really great. And Councillor Simpson, the comments on both internal audit and risk are well received. I think Matt's right. We have, in inverted commas, planned to bring something, and I suppose we've been considering where. And Matt and I were talking earlier that, well, do we broaden out the internal audit working group as more of a kind of risk and governance part of the group, where we can bring some of those things and do that deeper dive and look. I mean, Matt's idea on the governance that we could do for enforcement, I think, yeah, absolutely. I'd definitely be up for, well, certainly talking to Nick about bringing something to that group as well. So if we can kind of stretch the terms of reference of that group, I think it's the perfect place to kind of do some of that work with yourselves as members to kind of get on board with that, and then bring it to board for the kind of full ratification and approval. And just to say, we will be continuing, because, as I say, none of this stuff is finished. All of this stuff is moving forward, and I think I said on internal audit, we won't get reasonable assurance this year, but the aim is for 26-27 to get that. And the reasons we won't this year, I think, are well documented. But we know what the next milestone is, because it's not the end goal, but the next milestone on that is to get to a point where we've got reasonable assurance on risk. It's to have a fully embedded risk register that does have members saying, yeah, we own this. This is something that we collectively own. Now, perhaps not quite in touching distance of that, but we're certainly a hell of a lot nearer to it than we were this time last year.
Thank you. Reflecting on that, then I'm happy to move that from the chair. If there are no further comments, do I have a second? Councillor Watson, all in favour? Thank you, that's all. Moving on to agenda item 9, which is the implementation of the Renters' Right Act 2025. What's requested of us this evening is the recommendations to our board that we approve the revised housing multiple occupation licence conditions, that we approve the updated environmental health and private sector housing enforcement policy and civil penalty policy, effective from May, and grants delegated authority to the corporate directors to make minor amendments to the enforcement policy. So there's 3 parts to that. And we have the report here. We have Rob Watson here as well. If we have any questions, does anyone? Hands straight up there. Councillor Clues and Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. It looks good and I'm happy this is coming about. 2.7, staff are being briefed and trained to ensure the council is able to meet its statutory duties once the legislation comes into effect and raise and taking place with relevant stakeholders. So I take it that's environmental health, enforcement, housing officers, police, fire brigade.
Correct.
Right.
It also includes systems and advice, training standards, other wider functions than just ourselves to make sure that everybody's aware of it. But there is quite a community around bringing this in and making sure that all services are ready. So we're having weekly meetings with housing options and try to engage with citizens' advice development to make sure it's cohesive.
Yeah, and I think the one is 3.51. We appreciate we anticipate that there's sufficient capacity in the housing options team and private sector's housing team, but it doesn't mention the other ones that I've just said about enforcement, environmental health. Are we going to have the same capacity in those two areas to implement this?
The key thing with other areas is to make sure that they adequately signpost people and are able to identify and pick up the offences that take place. The enforcement functions will sit within private sector housing and housing options, so it's right that those teams are fully staffed. But we're not seeking additional staff in other areas because they'll be more like a signposting service to us.
I mean, I know we're only a small area, but I was watching one the other day and it was rogue landlords. And there was an HMO that should have had 10 and there was 22 people in there. One was sleeping in the pantry, there was one on the landing. 22 people wanted to all charge the phone up, so there was wires going everywhere. There was no hot water. That nailed the windows up. The back door had got a chain on it. So I know we are a smaller area, but so that, all those have been connected as a same police fire brigade. If we are going to do something. Thank you, Chair.
No, very welcome. Do you want to come back on that or do you want to take some?
Just respond to say that obviously we are a small area and we are quite rural, but that doesn't mean that the issues that exist everywhere else doesn't exist here. And quite often they're just hiding in plain sight. But we do work with fire service regularly, serving prohibitions, etc. So it is something we will continue working on fire service.
I mean, we've had a conversation about that very recently, but it might give some context. How many sort of prohibition orders are you working through?
We've got 3 on at the moment. I can't.
No, there's no detail.
But obviously we do find modern day slavery, immigration offences. Obviously we are working with ICE teams, so immigration and compliance, etc. Border force agencies as well. We serve the prohibitions where they're relevant, like all enforcement is here. If there's a history of under enforcement, it does lead to a proliferation of issues, not just within one service, but it's a thread across other services as well. So it's important that enforcement does take place. However, it's important that it's proportionate and it's transparent.
Thank you. I've then got Councillor Singh, Councillor Simpson, and Councillor Watson.
When is a rental property classed as a HMO? And also what percentage of the housing sector across North Warwickshire is HMO?
So a HMO is 3 or more occupiers, sharing facilities. Okay. We license HMOs that have got 5 or more occupiers. But the percentage of stock in North Warwickshire, it's a license of HMO is 0.1%.
Sorry, so again, it's 1%.
0.1%.
0.1%. Okay, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. I'm quite surprised that we can put a number on it. My understanding, certainly through planning board, we haven't got much of an idea about where they were and what have you. So I think that we have. Chairman, I'm very happy with the report. I'm certainly very happy with all of the recommendations. To an extent, I want to follow on a little bit on Councillor Clue's question and the conversation we had at the last board when this was here, because my concern then, and I'm sorry to say still, is how much resource do we need? Given, I think, isn't it something like 7,500 houses fall into the category? And if we're going to be doing all this, it's difficult, I think, to assess how much work there is. But I'm generally, somewhat assured, given that appropriate training is being given and that we're working with our partners to do it. I'm just wary, because potentially there's an enormous amount of it. And I'm just not really comfortable that we will have enough capacity to do everything. I found it really difficult to understand the civil penalties matrix. I'm not sure that I necessarily need to understand it in detail. The people will be doing it, I'm sure, understandable. But there is some pretty hefty penalties. And I'm not quite sure how. I think I read in the report that it will be 2 officers collectively that determine it. But I'm not sure how we are going to decide the penalties. Now, to an extent, I think the policy sets out the factors that are going to be taken into account. So that gives me, again, a lot of comfort. But I think I'm probably feeling significantly more comfortable in 6 months or a year's time when we have a report telling us how it's worked in practice, how this has moved on. And it is quite difficult to know in advance, have we got, everything that we might need to do it. But I'm still feeling genuinely slightly uncomfortable that there is potentially an enormous amount of work that government has given us, which I think last time it was actually about £6,500 that we're giving us to implement this work, which is clearly not going to fund it. But there's a lot of complexity and potentially a lot more work. And I'd just like us as a board to keep a very close eye on how this progresses.
I think that's a really, really useful provocation, actually. We have been given a very small amount of money to change and do a role and take on greater responsibility, particularly determining the charges and penalties potentially, without a view on how much capacity that might require. And as we go through, I think you're right, it's worth this board understanding and keeping an eye on through a report maybe of how many, and that's why I did say at the beginning about asked how many. I wasn't looking for details, so I know you can't share a lot of that at the moment, but because when they're live cases, but how many we're dealing with and how many are then prosecutable and all those sorts of things, and how that funnels through the system. Because the report writing for some of those things is going to be quite prolific, aren't they? And the information required by government to take those things forward. So I do think that's a really, really good point, actually. And I do think we should keep a much closer eye on that, because we don't know how big a task that's going to be. And potentially, given the changes to Section 21, it could be a much bigger task than it is currently, and that could grow as well. So, there's all of those factors coming into play that can generate a quite sizable chunk of work there for us that we're possibly not prepared for.
I could just respond on some of the numbers. So the private rented sector generally in this borough, we believe to be around 4,000 to 4,500 properties. HMOs as a part of that is obviously a much smaller number. But we know from in terms of HMOs the numbers because we license them, and we actively look for HMOs that aren't licensed. So every licensed HMO we've got here, we inspect before we give them a license. We also target HMOs that aren't registered. So obviously we speak to council tax and gain records from them. However, the private rented sector database, which should come in later this year, the government haven't said exactly when, but that will give us a really good indication of the true numbers of private rents in this area, because it will require every landlord, every property to register. Tenants will be able to go onto that before they rent a property, see the gas safety certificate, see the electrical installation certificate. So we'll have to monitor that, but that's a national rollout, which we think will happen late this year, early next year. So if that helps clarify the numbers for you, and also on the database and the HMOs, obviously these updated and HMO license conditions will enable sort of greater control of those HMOs in terms of antisocial behaviour from them, etc. So it will help it sort of build up the enforcement around that.
Thank you.
It certainly does help, Chad, and in all honesty, I think our officer has just earned himself another job in terms of coming to the planning board, because that's not all so I don't think we had when we were considering it.
I take it as a positive, Rob.
Yeah, take it. They take biscuits. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Interesting enough, I was going to kind of follow on from what Councillor Simpson was just saying. There. I'm delighted to know we actually know how many HMOs we have in the borough, because I've always been told at planning we have no idea, because those that are below, yeah, we have no idea. So it's really interesting that we can put a number on it. I mean, obviously there'll be those that are being operated unlicensed and below the radar. We accept that, but I think it's quite, you know, it's right, reassuring that we actually know of those licensed properties that they're being done properly, etc. My question was really around, obviously we put a regulation 4 in now that says all HMOs will require planning consent. Where does that fit into this? So would it go before the licence or as part of?
Can't do that. Some are legally allowed, aren't they, without consent, some of them. So.
Not new ones.
No.
We've got section 4 in, haven't we?
So with the Article 4 coming, obviously we need to look at what our HMO licensing policy states, because we wouldn't want to give a licence on one hand and obviously then not have planning permission on the other. So we need to work hand in hand with planning. Discussions are already happening around us doing that effectively. Technically, by law, we are allowed to issue a HMO licence without having planning permission. In this case law, on both sides. So we just need to get some advice on that to determine what the best way is, the most legally robust way to implement it is. Yeah.
Exactly, Chairman. I think that's exactly the same with operators' licences for vehicle establishments. Two bits of law operate independently, and you can get a licence and not have planning consent and vice versa.
Yeah, because the O licence is on the person, isn't it, rather than on the premises necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have on there, Michael, Councillor Osborne is in my list.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As we've said, some of this new legislation or the government have put down to us that we've got no choice but to comply with and to roll out. I think it's good that we've got a lot of partners that we can rely on. So that hopefully all of the work is not just going to be on our council officers. We're going to be able to lean on some of our partners for the right support in the right areas. So although there is a lot of work that could potentially come down this track, hopefully it'll be added to by some of the partners we're going to be working with and some of the team that we're going to have support for the new officers that are going to be in post. But I do agree, it's let's wait and see how much work does come through that funnel. I'm not really sure at the moment, but it could be a little bit more than we assume it could be, but we're not going to know yet. I'm just hoping it all comes together as I know it should do so.
Thank you. Further comments on this before we move to proposer for this? Councillor Singh, second. Councillor Simpson, all in favour? Everyone, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 10, which is the Brennan Football Club and Bootley Hill Recreation Ground. Our recommendation this evening is to consider and approve the terms of the draft lease as attached to Appendix 8 and 4, which will be used as the basis for a final agreement with the club. Do I have any questions or any points on the comments on this? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies because it's been a very positive meeting today. Looking through the lease, it does worry me because we've had lots of conversations to a number of the other sports grounds that we've got across the borough, where we've had real concerns about peppercorn rents, what's liable, who's liable for what does it tie the authority into. And reading through the lease, if I've read it correctly, a lot of that's still in there. So it just worries me that actually we've not learned from the previous problems we've had, and we're just going to do it again. So I do have some serious concerns about the way it's worded. And if I mean that, it talks about a peppercorn rent if demanded. It then talks about shared costs with the landlord, and it has a whole list of things that we are susceptible for cost. Now, if you're telling me we're going to have a lease and they're going to go off and do their own thing, and it's not going to cost me any money, you know, and they're going to be self-sufficient, they're going to be self-funding, then you go, okay, fine. but that's not what the lease says, if I've interpreted and read it properly. And it just concerns me that we've had this debate before, and yet we don't seem to have learned from it.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. I entirely agree with what my colleague has said. There are things in here which I think we talked about at the last board meeting and don't seem to be going through. But maintenance of trees is certainly one. The only bits of leases I tend to really understand are the insurance, and the sections of this lease that refer to insurance are wholly inadequate. Not good enough to say you've got to have public liability insurance and not say how much, and have a process for checking it, because in a sports field with adults as well as children and trees, there are great opportunities for liability, and we need to be clear of that. I'm absolutely happy with the generality that we're working in partnership with a sports club to actually enhance what they're doing. But we know from other sports clubs and leases that can still leave this authority with significant cost. And I think that is the case here too. To my mind, it's, just as an example, clause 36.3, the landlord and tenant at the cost of the landlord shall bear responsibility for the required assessments, audits, reviews and inspections in order to comply with health and safety legislation and all the factors following on from it. So this isn't entirely, I think.
Sorry, just tell me that.
36.3 on page 23 or 127
Oh, yeah.
140.
Yeah.
And 36.3 goes on for 3 pages. Not a tiny bit of cost that we are retaining. Now, I'm not trying to say that I want to school these things in without the club knowing. I think it's an essential part that they know too, and they understand. So I would like us to be abundantly clear what it is we think we're doing. But for the avoidance only doubt, inspecting the trees every 5 years is inadequate. We shouldn't be doing that. The insurance provisions are not adequate. And I've got some of these retained costs from health and safety obligations. I'd like greater clarity on how we're actually doing it. And if we are, then we should know what it is we envisage we will be paying for within this continuing arrangement. Yep. The other thing I'll say, this is a very minor point. I think we need to get a bit better at our redacting of information, because we've got bits scribbled out in this lease, which when they arrived on my telephone or my computer for me to read were not redacted. So if it's important enough to be redacted when it gets to us here, it really ought to be redacted when we send it out electronically as well.
Yes. Is that because we've got a printed copy and someone's gone through it, or is it because it's just easy, you can just easily remove it? It's not.
Well, aside from the fact I can read it underneath the covering in, I read it on my phone, so I know what it says.
Okay.
Please, Jill. Right, sure. No, I might, that'd be too easy, but.
No, perhaps not. Okay, I've got Councillor Osborne and then I'll bring in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have to agree with Councillor Simpson. It's like a deja vu. Don't really, having looked through it, seem to have moved on very much at all. I think we went to great length at the last board to highlight some of the failings and some of the service level agreements that probably weren't as they should be, especially around the health and safety and insurance level quotas. What does it leave us liable for? And equally, what does it leave the club liable for? They're going to want surety as well. This seems to still have a lot of vagaries in there, and as a legal document, we've got to be able to do better than this, especially with a lease of this length. So, unfortunately, I think it's going back again. Version 3.
Thank you. Mike, Becky, do you want to make any comment on in response?
Yes, and if I forget anything, please prod me. So yeah, apologies for the redaction. That was an oversight. We've taken it off the website, so that is a fully redacted version. Unfortunately, we didn't catch it quite in time for it to be circulated to members, so that is an oversight on our part. In terms of the lease itself, so it's not a commercial lease, it's a community lease. We haven't entered into it to make money. At the moment, the authority pays out for all the utilities on all of our pavilion sites. This agreement gives all the utility costs to the club, and this is something we're hoping to replicate across all of our pavilions. But we keep those statutory elements that we've learned before might not happen if we don't keep it. So things like your Legionella, your asbestos, the annual fire stuff. So we wanted to keep that to make sure it's done, which is why there's a big long list of things that you want to keep. And yes, there is a cost to us, but we felt the risk was greater giving it to them than expecting them to take it on. The Beaumonts and these are quite small clubs. Brendan Football Club is quite a small club. We didn't think it fair for them to be able to take on all of the costs to running the whole pavilion. Take on board your points about insurance. I can get legal to draw it out a bit more, and the cemeteries.
Thank you. Councillor Watson had to stand up there.
Thank
I'm
you.
assuming it's in relation to the fire risk assessments,
Well,
Legionella, the compliance checking.
So fire risk assessments under the Regulated Form Fire Safety Act 2005, Fire Safety Act 2021, the Building Safety Act 2022, you cannot delegate the authority as a tenant. They're responsible for carrying out fire risk assessments because they know how they're operating their building. So there's some quaint kind of bits in here. But I take on board your point, Becky, you know, but the thing is, where I always come back to, you know, these entities need to be commercially viable in their own right. And I get that they may not be able to do this, and they get, we may even want to say, but we want to do it in order to ensure it's being done properly, so the Legionella test, etc. But I don't see why we as an authority should be paying for it just because we want it done properly. We should be saying to them, we'll do it properly, and we'll do it on your behalf, but you're going to get the bill. And I understand, and I know people groan when I say these sorts of things, but it worries me when we're continually going down this road of subsidising many of these kind of things, because I think we're doing a disservice, and we learned that at Atherstone. You know, we're working with Atherstone at the moment. I know we've got the next agenda item for them to be self-sufficient, and I think it's really important that we work with these organisations and support them to get to that point at which they're going to be self-sufficient. Because in 2 years' time, we won't be here as an authority. Something else will be here, but we don't know what something else may look like. So it just worries me when we do that, and I understand why we might want to, but it's just a commercial bit for me that it shouldn't always sit with us.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. I completely agree with that. You know, to my mind, I really am wary that we are taking on more risk here than we currently have. Because when we own and operate, then you know there is an expectation that you will be in control of those risks. But under the let's call it Legionella, because that's what I'm bothered about, the written scheme control, that's something that we are retaining financial responsibility for. But we're putting in here some things that the club will have to do with no knowledge of how that will be operated. And frankly, you know, Legionella doesn't necessarily get fixed by weekly flushing. It says there'll be regular inspections, but it doesn't say when. And you know, I think we're all aware that Legionella you can get a low count one day and an enormous count the next day. So we've got to be very careful, I think, where we're going with some of this stuff. But you know, my understanding was that what we're intending to do here was essentially grant a long lease to the sports club and ensure that it wasn't necessarily going to be costing the authority a great deal going forward. My understanding of this lease is that that's not the case. And we're doing it without cognizance of the costs that we are retaining.
Thank you.
Which I don't think is good governance.
No, and I take your point on risk, actually, the one you make about Legionella. I mean, delegating some operational accountability for flushing whilst retaining the accountability for multiple testing, but without any instruction on, you know, how often, how regular, how long, whether or not they've done it, without the accountability. I think the two things have got to tie together, haven't they? And actually, does that then incumbent us? Are we then incumbent upon visiting, making sure it's happened? Which resource is going to do that, etc. So there is some future risk in there as well as cost, which perhaps not as an unintended consequence of some of those splits of accountability. So yeah, there's something to consider and think about there operationally versus arm's length accountability as a landlord. Okay, anyone else want to talk on this one? Michael, did you have your hand up there? No.
Spoke.
Do you want to come back on that one then, Becky? And
so just on HI, we've kept the flushing at the moment to make sure it's being done. Yeah.
So we're going back to community asset transfers. And the council signed up to the proposal that it would look at enabling those community assets to transfer to local community groups. But we're not competent to carry out commercial or trading or undertaking legionnaires of that qualifications or to undertake some health and safety inspections unless they purchase that in. They work on subscriptions, but what the county wanted to do under this community asset transfer was move those assets to those communities and then support them in a way that allowed them to have operational control, and we would support them with the technical and statutory responsibilities around regional risk assessments, those bits around their operational practices, to make sure they're safe. So the fact checking out the fire extinguishers remained as our responsibility. The flushing of the system would be made our responsibilities. We could try to transfer those to the communities, groups, but they wouldn't be able to afford it. Not without significantly increasing those subscriptions that those members pay. And there are community groups who are paying those subscriptions, the children, the adults, those that are using those facilities. And we could retain that asset, but under that transfer, it's around developing those communities to be able to take on to that responsibility. I think what you're asking me for is a list of our responsibilities that we would take, those that would transfer the costs associated to that. And I'm happy to bring them back.
I think if I could, Chair, and I fully understand it, and it's a really difficult thing, but there is an element of risk if you retain responsibility whilst not being in control of how it's done, when it's done, etc. Fire extinguishers, for example, all those things, you are introducing an element of risk. So to my mind, whilst we might have the expertise, I kind of understand that they may not. We can support them in that, although there are plenty of experts out there who will tell them BS 5306 is how you maintain extinguishers unless they're non-maintained. So there's a number of things you can do. A lot of expertise is out there on these things. But and I'll go back to the point, and I always get the daggers for that. Why is that? If the people using it should be the people paying for it, in my opinion, and that's just the way I am. You know, can have whatever you like as long as you pay for it. And that's how I think it is. So if it means their subscriptions for the clubs have got to go up, then that's what it is, because that's how you make it a commercially viable enterprise.
I didn't believe that we were trying to, the community asset transfer, to make it commercially viable, nor does it reference commercially viable in that community asset transfer. This was about encouraging local community to grow and provide services, but have some control over it. But like I said, I'm happy to wear that list of showing across the two if that helps.
Apologies, but you talk to someone, everything should be commercially viable. Otherwise, someone's got to pay. Someone always has to pay for it.
And the council's been paying this for years.
yeah, and the argument is also that the residents pay because actually they're paying towards the council tax to get services as well. So it's an indirect but direct way. But I've got Councillor Simpson and then I've got Councillor Clues.
Thank you. I think there's an element of assumption in what the officer was telling us. Because it was, if we give them this, then they must inevitably put up their subscription. So I'd like to return the compliment to Councillor Humphreys, because I'm aware that there were other sports clubs that we lease land to, who then sell the facility to other people at a significantly higher price. And I'm aware that his grandchildren play on football clubs. that I think are leased by us and they end up paying for it. So I don't accept there is an inevitability that the subscription will have to increase because there are plenty of opportunities of meeting those costs. And this report, I'm sorry, just assumes that we're going to keep on paying. Did I remember that right, Councillor?
Yeah, you should remember that, right? It cost me £200 a month, by the way.
Just
It's granddad duty, I'm afraid.
Just referring to point 17 in the lease, where it says, except as expressly permitted by the lease, the tenant shall not charge, underlet or part with possession or share occupation of, or permit any person to occupy or create any trust in respect of the interest or whole of any part of the property. So they can't underlet that.
Yeah, but I don't think that excludes them having other people play football on a Friday afternoon.
No, that's a subscription-based model from Greenwich Football Club, isn't it?
Yeah. And it sort of says, but I mean, I generally thought we were doing, really wasn't transferring the operational use of that site to them, and they were paying the costs of having it. And if they wish to let other people use it occasionally for a fee, then that's perfectly reasonable. That's what most of these things, all the parish councils that I have sports fields, and they charge people for using it. Unreasonable.
Most don't have proper premises or changing facilities, and therein lies a big issue in terms of compliance and liability. Councillor Clues, and then I've got Mike.
Thanks, Chair. Before I speak, can I just have a clarification? Is this adult football we're talking about or youth?
So Greenwich Football is a adult.
Adults?
Yes.
No comment.
So, you indicated that you want to come back there, Mr. Brown.
Although we do lease and the number of organisation leases out pitches for play, they're not self-sufficient. And without having a robust financial business model, which you will see for a lot of the FA funding and others, you will not make them self-funded without making those costs astronomically high. When you look at the maintenance of those ground pitches, when you look at that work, the charges made by a lot of parishes or even the council does not cover the cost of maintenance.
Then it likes me, Chairman, also to say the whole premise of this is not what I understood it to be.
Okay. I think the premise of it came from community asset transfer to enable, as an enabler for community-based sport on a facility that we own, but we don't need to use ourselves for anything. So, and it is a field that people can play football on, and it's enabling people to use it for that purpose, rather than the fact that we would then just have an area of ground that we mow or maintain and nothing happens on it. So it's about creating community use for that as a facility and a service, if you like. That was the premise of, I believe, the community asset transfer. Councillor Davey.
Oh, Grendon isn't just adults. No, there are kids football, youth football played there as well, and they do hire it out to other sports groups, because when they've had their pitch, I don't know whether they've reseeded it or done something with it where it's not playable. They've suggested people come to Baddesley, Kiswell Ground, and have suggested talking a lot of money. They've suggested to us as the parish council to charge quite a bit of money for what, which is obviously what the same amount that they charge, and they don't want us to charge less, because then those groups are going to come to us and yeah. So no, there is youth sports down there, and they do sublet if that's how they do it. I don't know.
I think picking up from the comments though, there is some reiteration perhaps in relation to insurance and surveys and so I do think we probably need to come back with this one. Is that fair view?
Sorry, Chair, if I got, I should be picking up on Councillor, there was also a fundamental debate to be had about what are we doing with this land, what are we doing with this community asset, what's the principle of it, is it the community asset? Because I'll tell you, if I put my local plan hat on, I can use sites for housing and employment land every day of the week. Trust me, we have a significant challenge to find allocated sites. You know, so all I'm saying is, and I'm not suggesting you do that for a sports ground, but the point I'm making is that there is a value to this land. We may not necessarily use it, but there is a value, and we have a duty, in my opinion, to all of our residents, not just kind of one community or one parish, etc., to make sure that we make best use of that.
Sorry, I've got Councillor Parsons then.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for your Councillor Watson, but I think when we draw this sort of plan, we have a responsibility to build a decent community which has decent facilities, decent infrastructure, and some of that will cost. But, you know, as has been said, we are dealing with council taxpayers, and they do contribute, and they do actually deserve to see a decent community, and that's a huge responsibility for us when we're looking at our local plan. It's not just to make money and sell off the family silver. Our job is to produce decent communities that decent people can live in and enjoy their life and experience. You know, I have a granddaughter, as Councillor Humphries has grandchildren. She loves gymnastics. She has been nurtured and taken a long way in gymnastics. She represents the West Midlands at the moment by dint of clubs that have support from the council. In actual fact, this is a Staffordshire club. But those things are important, and those opportunities are important, and the welfare and recreation that needs to be there is of importance and is a responsibility for local councils, in my view. It is not just simply to balance the books and make the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
I entirely agree. Absolutely agree. But if I wanted to play devil's advocate, what's the difference between selling off the family silver and leasing it to one organisation for 10 years for a peppercorn? At the minute, in theory, anybody could go and play on that property. So if you like, we are restricting the utility from other groups, saying that, look, you know, I'm seeing it for positive reasons, which I still fundamentally agree with. I agree with where I think the policy, where I thought the policy was going. And I thought what we're trying to do is not make money, but not necessarily have unfunded liabilities. And all I can see here is we have got unquantified, unfunded liabilities. And I think, given that we are the body responsible for governance, we should understand what that is. And I don't at the minute. I can see liabilities in here that I don't have a price tag to put on. That doesn't necessarily mean ultimately I won't be able to get behind this lease and understand it. I just want clarity, because we've had other leases, haven't we, that keep coming back to us, that keep having problems because none of us understood what it was, or in fact we were told certain things and that was not what was written down. And I'm sorry for Grandad Football Club, but they are suffering from the been here before syndrome, and we have been here before.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Yeah, I completely get that. I think one of the reasons for tying that up for 10 years is that the asset could be improved substantially by FA grants that we wouldn't get otherwise. So, you know, and then we have an asset with better facilities on it for our borough. So that is one benefit of doing that and on purpose of doing that. But I do understand your point about unfunded liabilities. But in the spirit of being able to accept or move on from this recommendation, which it doesn't sound like we've had Councillor Osborne comment that he thinks it needs to go back for some of clarification on those points. There's points about insurance, tree surveys, and that. So, but is there a recommendation? Is there a revised proposal in there? Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend that it goes back for another review on the comments that most of the councillors have made, taken on board what the officers have put in as well, and try and come back with a cohesive piece of work that we all understand who's doing what, why and where.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, councillor Simpson. All in favour of that as an alternative recommendation this evening? Thank you. All, that's carried.
If I could, I think I know what you're going to say, councillor Mason. And generally, I wasn't
No,
to put words into your mouth. I was playing devil's advocate.
No, I absolutely understand that, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just disagreeing. I feel that these facilities are important to our communities, and they've got to remain important.
You should feel sorry for Councillor Parsons. Unfortunately for Councillor Parsons, you've got a very skillful granddaughter who's in a Cinderella organisation. Because there's no money in at the grassroots, is there, for gymnastics?
Well, yeah, it comes down to grandparents being there to.
But it wasn't that we make money out of it, it's just that it washes its face. But it's a fair point, you know, it's not about making money, but it's got to be financially sustainable.
Yeah, so some of the unfunded liabilities, we just need to understand, and the roles and responsibilities element that Mike committed to there, I think is really important. Agenda item 11 then, so Atherstone Town Community Football Club engagement update. So obviously there was a motion at full council on the 24th. Good night, thank you, Councillor Parsons. There was a motion at full council on the 24th of September where the football club have subsequently been working closely with our officers, particularly Mike Brown, understanding the current issues, site conditions, barriers to growth and funding, and to establish a plan of activity that could support the club in realising its aspirations. And we committed to coming back to this board in 6 months' time to comment on that engagement essentially. And the report sets out how that engagement has taken place, that it's still in progress, and they're working through different options together in terms of the formation of that club and how it starts to realise its aspirations. I think, is that a fair summary of the work we've done alongside Atherstone Club? You know,
unpicking the existing arrangements.
Yes. Okay, so is there anything you want to add in terms of, you know, and our recommendation and what we need to do as a board tonight is fairly simple actually. It's just to note that progress and engagement to date, and to note some timescales for future engagement.
If I may just add, Chair, that I'd written to the club stating that under their current structure, we would expect to be charging them rents, just at least, just the same as we charge any other commercial entity. However, should they change their direction and make up the club, that will be a different consideration for the council and external financial support, not from us, but from other partners, such as the FA and others. Since then, we've received a notice that they are holding a meeting on the 24th of March to consider moving to a CBS, Community Benefit Society.
And that's an organiser. Just explain what that is for us.
It's a non-profit organisation, and it's effectively owned by the supporters of the club. Is the club? They pick the board of directors, and it has to have a certain set of documents in place to function and go forward. If they're looking to move to a club of a higher level, then they need significant improvement on their ground, and for that they need to see external funding. And at the moment, as a commercial organisation, no one would give them that funding.
Thank you. That's a good summary. Councillor Humphreys.
You know, I could go on about it forever, but I just would like to make sure. I know in the not too distant past, we've ended up with Atherstone Rangers wanted to play a final there, and the Walking Football Group, who are all older chaps, and you and I can qualify for that. If I could walk, I would. Have wanted to play a round robin competition there, and they've been denied. So it really needs to open the doors to become community environment. Yeah?
It has no choice.
Okay. So I hope you're sort of holding that to the fire where that's concerned.
We would help set that rule book of what that looked like for the club, because the PB1 is external funding from the FA and others.
So essentially what you're telling us is that you've sort of pointed out and the barriers to funding currently are because of it's how it's constituted. It's a limited company, not a community-based organisation. It isn't community linked in the right way, so that the FA aren't attracted to give it funding. because of its closed nature. Right, okay, thank you. That's a lot clearer. Thank you, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. As we said in the previous one, we've been here before, and I am genuinely wary. On the basis of what was discussed at full council, I'm delighted to hear that we're having an ongoing dialogue with the club, and that our officers and I know some of our members are working towards that. And on the basis that this report is only to note the progress on engagement to date, including next steps and timescales, it seems fairly innocuous, doesn't it? But can we say that with a straight face? Is there any hostage to fortune in here that's implying greater than that? And I'm particularly focusing on section 3.6. Then the club will be in a better position to seek and obtain external support from the council. Not merely seek, but seek and obtain. What are we saying in this report? Is it simply that we're engaging, or are we holding out other promises?
Fair question. I'll open the floor to you there, Mike.
Thanks. There are no promises. However, what there is that we would help them develop a suitable business case to ensure that Clodwich's new structure supported the community and not just selected few. That is so important. That if you're going to have a community benefit society, it supports the community. Community has access to it, and it attracts younger people to actually play football. But whatever the age is there, male, female, and other sports and activities. And it's important that constitution meets that requirement.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that? Because I've got major next.
I get all of that. I understand all of that. Seek and obtain.
So essentially, are you flagging that you're concerned that that's a liability and that's an obligation, a further obligation on our part?
I've been here again and again and again where members have been quite clear over what they thought was happening. And it grows legs and it runs a mile. What are we intending here? Seek and obtain.
Reading into what you've done so far is that you're putting them in touch with people through the FA, through people like Aston Villa, who are helping them with their business planning. It's about provision and network and resource. Rather than
the council.
Yeah, but we are giving them that support currently.
I'm meeting with them monthly at the moment to try to help them go in the right direction and have the right structure and obtain the right support externally. What that would look like for the future of the club, I can't give you an answer because one of the requirements is that they would need to develop a business case, and we would help them do that to be able to obtain the right funding and grants for them to move and reach their aspirations. That's not financially supporting other than our time as officers.
I would be very happy had the report said seek and obtain non-financial, but it doesn't say that, does it?
Okay. So I've got Councillor Singh, Councillor Clues, Councillor Watson. Yeah, go on.
Right, I mean, I'd just like to say thanks to Mike and his team. That was decided in the September meeting last year, and that we would talk, the council would talk, have dialogue with the football club and guide them to wherever we can get them. If the CBS is in their, grasp, let them have it. If not, then we'll come back to the council meetings and decide what we're going to do. That's all. I mean, nothing's for sure here at the moment in this paper. It's just your report on what's been going on for the last 6 months.
Thank you. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we have honoured the motion that was put before us. When we had them all sitting up there, we have been talking to them. But as a local, and walking the town most days, well, I haven't for the last 12 weeks, but before that, all we ever got was, council don't do anything to us. They don't give us any money, and that. So, as is with the other one, when it says financial implications, none. I wish that some of these we would put and get over to them that it is a cost to our residents because it's officers' time. Even writing this report up here is officers' time.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is I think people ought to recognise the officers' time and the meetings of our officers' time. Because while they're in these meetings, while they're writing these reports, they're probably not doing some else projects that the council's got. Thank you, Chair.
No, I completely agree. It's actually valuing your own time is quite a key, important thing to do. Councillor Simpson? Oh no, it was Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
I've written Simpson on my list.
Yeah, I think 3.6 needs to just be rewritten to make it clearer. Because if you do read it, instead of seeking obtain external support from the council and other external organisations, grants and other available, it almost implies they're going to get grants from the council. You could be reading that. So I think if we are just going to offer them expertise and advice and help from the school, then I think we should say that. If we're saying grants from the FA, then we should say grants from the FA or other external bodies. I'd just like to see a bit more clarity in that about what's our involvement, so that, as Councillor Simpson says, we don't get bitten again where we get tied into financial costs, and where they're going to get grants from. Is that the FA or is that other bodies? And be really clear about what our
I can answer that yet until we've done those points I've set out, 1 to 5 at 3.1 up. Until we've done those, I can't tell you what their full financial position is, what the risks and liabilities are associated to the club on site, nor can I tell you the cost for their aspirations. However, I do know that if they do have aspirations to grow, they will need significant investment. But I would not expect us to providing grants for that investment.
But I'd like to think
the FA
the financial investment is not coming from the council.
Well, you would get that, whatever that position is, when we ask or talk to the council about what investment they require and where best that investment will come from. That comes from that business case, not today.
So it's a follow-up piece of work. So is there any issue then in looking at the wording just here where it says the support from the, you know, the professional advice, for example, from the council, as opposed to seek and obtain external support? It's just at the moment we're giving professional advice, aren't we?
In relation to granting financial support, yeah.
Yeah. But that the semantics on that just changes some of the inference.
Jonathan does the chair, because the officer was quite clear. He doesn't know. And he may do. That's what he said.
It's quite true. I don't know.
Could you provide?
Okay, I've got Councillor Chapman and then I'll come to you. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. I think
Patient there. Sat in my blind spot.
usually not visible. I think it's just a question of the wording. Support from the council and other external organisations. There's a full stop in there. Grants and other available support to enable reporting progress and improve within the current FA structure, within the current FA rules and pyramid. I think it's quite clear that it's within the FA structure. It just needs a bit tidying up.
I think, sorry, mate, if I might. So the key thing is we're noting. We're not recommending approval of. So we are noting progress and noting what's in the report. So there is no approval to do anything beyond what we've already done. If and I expect at some point there will be a business case, maybe not to this authority, maybe it will be to this authority. If it is, that's the point. It will be scrutinised. It will come back, and you will be able to see what is proposed within that business case. So at the minute, I think that the fundamentals of this report are looking backwards. So they're looking backwards 6 months at what were we asked to do, what did we agree to do, as Councillor Singh's pointed out, and mostly this is about what we've done and looking at what we've done, which is what we said we would do in the council chamber on that evening. What might stand out, I think, is a range of options and things that could happen next. But we're not committing at this point to doing any of those because we're noting this.
Councillor Simpson, you have to on top there.
Thanks, Jim. I agree with that. I have no disagreement with it. That's what council said we were going to do, but there's a clearly established principle. isn't it? When a judge hands down a decision, he gives the decision and then he chats about it. Obiter. And the stuff that's in obiter informs the decision and enables people to understand the direction of travel.
Thank you for that. Okay, right. So I think we are at the point where we need to decide, but we haven't got to decide anything actually, just note the progress that has been made. So I'm happy to move back from the chair that you note that we went back to, we've come back to the board as we were asked to do with an update on what has happened in the preceding 6 months in relation to this council engaging with Atherstone Town Football Club.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. Seconded by Councillor Humphreys. All in favour? Thank you, that's good. Abstentions? Nobody wants to put their hands up again. Right, moving on to agenda item 13, which is, no, that's not. I've got some housing working group minutes.
Is it minutes?
Agenda item 12.
Yeah, it doesn't say minutes, I think it is. Chair, can I move the minutes of the housing working group on the 18th?
Just yes, you man. I'll second it. There. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Moving on to agenda item 13, which is the exclusion of the press and public. Which is
the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Humphreys. All in favour? Thank you.